All right, the final one that we're talking about, Dalton, is Boise State at number 7 Oregon, 10 p.m. Eastern time on Peacock, actually. So you got to get your streaming service all set up to watch this game. There's a couple of storylines that we could talk about for this game. One, the Boise State side of it. This game has massive playoff implications for Boise State. If you look at the betting odds right now on DraftKings Sportsbook, Boise State is second among Group of 5 teams behind Liberty in terms of betting odds to make the college football playoff at plus 450 right now on DraftKings. It's still incredibly early in the season. I know that's week 2. But how they perform in this game specifically will go a long way in determining whether or not they get that spot in the 12-team field if they win the Mountain West Conference. Because if they get blown out by Oregon, just blown out of the water, the committee could look at that. And if Oregon doesn't win the Big Ten and is still the best non-champion, Oregon will be the 5 seed. Boise State could be the 12 seed. And they'll say, all right, do we want to see Boise State, Oregon again? Like we know what happened last time. That, at Oregon as well, that could be a major factor. But if Boise State keeps this game close, like single digits close, or even pulls off the upset, that would give them a much better victory than any other Group of 5 team could have. Any other Group of 5 team would not have a better victory than Boise State beating Oregon, or even Boise State losing by 3 or 7 to Oregon in this game. So this is a major game for Boise State in terms of their playoff chances. And then on the other side, Dalton, that you can get into when you talk about your matchup, what the hell happened to Oregon last week? They beat Idaho, an FCS team, by 10 points. They were favored by 50 points in that game. We had Oregon as the 3rd best team in the country. We thought they had the best offense in the country. They only scored 24 points against Idaho. So, Dalton, I guess going to your matchup when Oregon has the ball right now, what happened in that Idaho game, and should we be worried about them going in the future?
I saw 2 things during this game, going back and watching the All-22. One, their offensive line just hasn't gelled yet, right? They lost Jackson Powers-Johnson in the middle. Even their tackles, Connor Lee and Cornelius, kind of struggled a little bit. It just, especially in pass protection, it just wasn't to the usual standard we're used to seeing out of Oregon, right? And let's look at some of these Oregon offensive line grades from last week, okay? A 69.3 overall grade. That would have been the 4th worst of any game last year for Oregon, okay? A 68 pass blocking grade. That would have been the 2nd worst in any game last year. The only one it would have been ahead of was the first Washington game. 3.8 yards per carry. Lower than any game last year that they played. Just struggling to run and struggling to create explosive runs. Only 3 explosive runs of 10 yards or more. That would have tied for the fewest of any of their games last year. So first things first, the offensive line. Now, there's some new faces in the middle of it. They've got a returning pair of tackles, but they're trying to figure out the right combination up front. Had some guys struggle on the interior. The other thing, too, that I wondered when I was watching it, and I know they're loaded. They've got backs. They've got 2 good tight ends. They've got Tej Johnson. They've got Evan Stewart. But do they have a guy somewhere in there, like Troy Franklin last year, that can take off and get safeties out of the box and is a home run hitter? Because Dylan Gabriel's average depth of target last week was 4.3 yards. And there's nothing, I will tell you right now, the first thing I want to say, too, there's nothing wrong with Dylan Gabriel. Yeah. He was still spectacular. He completed, 41 of 49, somewhere in there. 2.16 average time to throw, but a 4.3 yard average depth of target. I understand that Bo Nix had an average depth of target that was really, really low too, but there were enough shots taken in this offense, especially to Troy Franklin. Like Tej Johnson is not the long speed guy. I'm not sure Evan Stewart is the long speed guy. He's a great route runner, but I don't know that they have someone that can take the top off. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they've got some guys that run 4.340s that we're just not aware of yet, or we didn't see play well last week. But those are the 2 things that I look at in this game for Oregon. Can the offensive line gel against the defensive line that ranked 118th in the country last year and only put up a 67.3 overall grade against Georgia Southern last week? This is an advantageous matchup on paper. But the way Oregon played last week up front, you go, okay, well, is it? It should be. It still should be. I think you have 2 NFL tackles at the very least on that offensive line. I want to see their offensive line play better. And I want to see if there's a little more verticality to this offense, because last week it was very much working in that kind of 10-yard box, or Gabriel made a couple of big-time intermediate throws in that kind of 15-yard box. The ability last year for them occasionally to throw it over the top to Troy Franklin was a big asset. Who is going to be that guy that gets downfield on this team?
I think, yeah, it's a big matchup to watch. And Yeah, I think, one part of it too, it was weird. You look at the team stats from the Idaho game, and you look at the stats alone, not the score, and you think, oh, Oregon killed them.
Yep.
And then it was a close game. It was weird. It was very weird. I know Idaho scored a couple trick plays too, so a lot of it felt fluky in a lot of ways. So I do think Oregon, we'll get to our score prediction a little bit later, but I think they'll be able to bounce back. My matchup to watch when Boise State has the football, can anyone stop Ashton Jeanty? Anyone. I mean, he is our guy. We interviewed him preseason, and he told us, we're like, hey, what's your goals for the rest of the season? And he said 2,500 yards and 20 touchdowns, and I'll be in New York for the Heisman ceremony. He got 6 touchdowns and 267 rushing yards in the first game of the season against Georgia Southern. He currently is the number 1 running back on PFF's 2025 NFL Draft Big Board. In fact, Dalton, I think he's the number 11 overall prospect. And PFF, Trevor Sikkema is risking his job by putting Ashton Jeanty that high, but he deserves it. He has been an awesome running back throughout his entire career. He was the highest graded running back in the country last year, earning a 94.9 grade. So he's not just the engine of Boise State's offense, he's the entire car of this offense. If you stop Ashton Jeanty, you stop number 2, you stop Boise State. That's as simple as that, because he is that important, that critical to the offense. And it wasn't like he was stat padding against Georgia Southern. They needed him to put up 6 touchdowns. They're like, okay, Ashton, they scored again. We got to get out of here. And they kept feeding him the ball. He broke a tackle on 55% of his carries as well. This guy is a bona fide superstar. Listen, we've made the comps before to Alvin Kamara, and usually you hear that comp all the time. This time, I think it's warranted. I think it's that kind of running back that we have. I will say, Oregon's defensive line is absolutely massive. One of the issues I had with their defensive line when we were previewing them going into the season was, how are they going to rush the passer? Because they almost are too big. But defending the run, I don't think they're going to have any issues whatsoever. All of them, Dalton, all 4 starters on the edge and on the interior weigh at least 270 pounds. They are a massive, massive defensive line. They earned a top 30 run defense grade last year, tied for 4th in tackling grade as well. And they also did an excellent job of limiting opposing tailbacks as receivers, which Jeanty didn't even do against Georgia Southern. I think he only had 4 receiving yards in that game. He's the best receiving back in college football. But last year, Oregon only allowed 38 receiving yards to a running back in a game. That was the most they allowed all year, was 38 receiving yards to a running back. So I think Oregon will be able to handle, at least contain Jeanty a little bit in this game. And if you do that, like I said, Boise State's offense really runs through this guy. If you do that, I'm not sure how Boise State can score too many points.
Yeah, I mean, Jeanty, he's an animal. I remember him telling us, he said, I want to run as powerful as Marshawn Lynch with the balance of Alvin Kamara, and I want to be a receiver like Christian McCaffrey. I mean, those are pretty good guys to look up to if you're trying to build.
That's the greatest running back of all time right there.
If you have all 3 of those things in one guy, that's Barry Sanders, Walter Payton type stuff. But no, I mean, it does. It all runs through him. And I think the interesting part, too, is there are times when he does line up at receiver. He was a receiver in high school. He can catch the ball. Took a jet sweep for a long run last week, too. I mean, he can line up anywhere. So it's not just in the box you have to worry about him. You have to know where he is at any of the 53 yards of width on the field, right? If you don't know where Ashton Jeanty is, well, first of all, you have a problem because you just need to, right? But I do think there is a dynamic in this game where they are going to need some balance, right? You're not going to get 7 or 8 rushing touchdowns as a team every week and 6 from Jeanty. So they are going to need Maddox Madsen to work off of Jeanty, and at least in the play action game for Boise State if they're going to stay in this.
Absolutely. So, Dalton, will Oregon bounce back in a major way and remind everyone why they're a top 3 team in the country entering the year? Or will Boise State get a major resume boost for the college football playoff candidacy?
I do think there's a bounce back for Oregon. I think 2 things can be true. I think Ashton Jeanty can have a very good game and Oregon bounces back. Because we saw him, he had a really good game against Washington last year, who was the national runner-up. He had over 100 total yards last year against an elite UCLA defense in their bowl game. He can have a very good game. I just don't think Boise State has enough firepower elsewhere, and I don't think they're good enough defensively to stop a team like Oregon. I mean, they gave up 45 points, was it, to Georgia Southern? 42 or 45 points to Georgia Southern last week. Oregon's a whole different animal than Georgia Southern. Now, again, there's things I want to see Oregon improve upon. I think they will. I've got Oregon 34-17. I do think Boise State could give them problems if they get into their run game and they can control time of possession and limit. I really am curious to see if Oregon can get over the top. on Boise State. Or if it's going to be a game that's played in the box and a little more patient and a little more at the Broncos' pace, then you could find yourself. If this game is played for Oregon at the pace that they played it last week, and they had a couple of fourth downs they didn't convert to, but when you talk about just constantly in the box, check down, 5 to 15-yard throws, you're kind of allowing Boise to milk the clock even on defense and stay in it. I want to see if there's any home runs for Oregon. I do think their offensive line will bounce back. I think the running game will be a little bit more consistent this week. Jordan James could be in for a big week. I've got Oregon 34, Boise State 17.
Yeah, they allowed 45 points to Georgia Southern. It was 56-45 was the final score of that game. I think it'll be a big bounce back for Oregon. I think 41-20 is my final score prediction of this game. I think, again, that Idaho game, yes, it was alarming in some areas, like the offensive line and some of the receiving core issues, but more so, dude, I think it was just a fluke. I really think it was a fluke. I think Oregon is still absolutely going to be a national title contender this year. They're going to remind everyone why they're a top 5 team in the country entering the year, and they're going to have a dominant victory over Boise State with a 41-20 victory.